Hey guys, welcome back to the Historian's Craft. So this is the final video up in this series I have going on Japanese history. So, we finally reached the end. I know I have like 40 million different series going right now, so I'm kind of actually surprised I got to this point. Anyway, before we get started, I know the screen has been red in the whole series. It's blue right now. I don't know why that is. I can't figure out how to change it. Anyway, what I want to talk about first is this thing that occurred in Japan and the world between 1871 and 1873. So during the Meiji period, and that is this, the Iwakura Mission. So this is a record of diaries kept and some other primary sources kept during the Iwakura Mission. So what is this thing? Well, the point of the Iwakura Mission basically was, okay, we need to make Japan a modern nation state. Japan has to have a modern military, etc., etc. We can't do that just by being in Japan. We have to go out and we have to see, well, this country does their military stuff this way. This country does it this way. This country does it this way. Which one has the best model? So the point of the Iwakura Mission is you spend 2 or 3 years going around the country and you check out all the different constitutions, you check out military technology, everything else, and you find out which models apply best for Japan. So, what occurs basically is they understand, they being the Meiji oligarchs, that Japan has problems. They're in serious danger of becoming a colony, at least they think they are, of the West. To prevent this, you have to become civilized. You have to become westernized. Well, you know, what do the powers have in common? Strong military, powerful economy. You have to build this. So you go to Germany and you figure out, oh, well, the Constitution actually fits pretty well with Japanese lines. So we're going to take the Constitution. We like the French model of military, so we're going to build a military on the French model. But then they got the crap kicked out of them in the Franco-Prussian War. We're going to switch to the Prussian model of doing things. So this is what the Iwakura Mission was all about. In this process, many of the disaffected samurai who lost basically everything after, they lost their Han, after they lost their domains, they lost their status, they lost their titles, they become furiously nationalistic. Because they realize that unless they do this, Japan could potentially be screwed. So disaffected samurai and daimyo from Satsuma, Choshu, and other domains, they form an imperial army. I went over this in the other video. They overthrow a weakened shogunate, and they surrender power to the emperor, at least in theory, although they really do keep it, after the Boshin Civil War. The samurai from these domains, what they do is they take power, but they don't establish a new shogunate. Everything is in the hands of the emperor, with the other daimyo and some samurai forming this new oligarchy surrounding the emperor. So there's a new cabinet. They're directing the Meiji emperor's efforts. So when they do this, they deliberately destroy their own domains. They deliberately destroy Chosu, Satsuma, etc. to create a new Japan. These are people who go beyond just mere patriotism. These are people who feel something for their country, for their nation, that the average individual doesn't necessarily feel. Because of that drive, because they realize that the clock is potentially ticking against them, and because of the Iwakura Mission, Japan centralizes much faster than Western countries did when Western countries were undergoing the same process in the 1400s, 1500s, and 1600s. In 1868, the way they're doing this, it's not a clearly outlined program. It's not like, okay, we have this checklist of things we have to do. First step is expelling the shogun, then we have to reform the military, then the economy, then this. It's not like an A, B, C, D, E, F kind of thing. It's a generalized list of things they know they have to get done, and they're spurred on by this sense of clear and present danger. If we don't westernize, if we don't industrialize rapidly, the West could potentially come and take over Japan. like they did to China, like they did to Korea, and India, and Vietnam. We don't want this. So they act very quickly, and they don't tolerate any dissent. They don't tolerate any crap when they're going about doing this. So when this is finished, the Japanese state, although it is supposed to be controlled by the emperor, is really controlled by this clique of Meiji oligarchs. Now, in doing that, well, sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not. Japan has a very clear set of advantages here, and you can read most of them on the screen, but I'm going to highlight the important ones. It's compact enough to unify. Japan's not actually that big, but it's also just large enough to be powerful, provided it was completely unified. It has a good imperial past, which you can use to bolster new nationalism and bind people to the nation state. There are the preconditions in Japan of industrialization. There are some indications they were maybe going towards that eventually. So there's a spirit of like what we would understand to be like proto-capitalism. The people are healthy. They're fairly obedient. They're pretty individual as well, pretty individualistic. There's a high rate of urbanization, high literacy, etc. It's also remote from the West, so they have time to centralize in case something were to ever happen. It's not like, you know, France is trying to centralize and they have to deal with Britain and Prussia at the same time. The disadvantages, though, Japan's mainly mountainous, it's pretty heavily forested. Yeah, there's a somewhat centralized road system, but, like, not really. So there's that. They're islands, they're kind of hard to bring together. There's not really national loyalty, you have to construct that, etc. You know, there's a lack of resources. This is part of why Japan develops their own empire. There's a technology gap. So there are problems they have to deal with, but they managed to unify Japan and build a modern nation state fairly quickly, and they do it pretty successfully. Now, I mentioned all of these different domains, these different Han, in this video and in the past couple ones. Satsuma, Chosu, Hizen, and Tosa. These are the main areas where the Japanese leadership of the Meiji period are drawn from. And you can see on this map here on the right-hand side, these domains are the ones in orange. The ones in like this purple, lavenderish color, those are ones that tried to back the shogunate in the Boshin War. Those ones lose. So Satsuma, Chosu, Hizen, and Tosa, these are the key domains, specifically Satsuma and Chosu. And part of the problem the Meiji oligarchs get into is that once everything's said and done, the vast majority of those people are drawn from Satsuma and Chosu, so they kind of have a monopoly on this, and that causes some problems among Meiji leadership. So the main Meiji oligarchs you can see here, 3 of the key ones come from the imperial court, 9 were from Satsuma, 6 are from Chosu, and 3 from Tosa, and 4 from Hizen. So, again, back to my point, Chosu and Satsuma have the lion's share. Indeed, they have most of the key ones, like Ito Hirobumi, the first Japanese prime minister, Yamagata Aritomo, the guy that develops, who is largely credited anyway with developing Japan's modern military. So, the key people come from these 2 areas. Not to say the others aren't important, but the lion's share of control is shared by Satsuma and Chosu. They eventually have to work this out. Now, on top of that, many of the oligarchs, they have substantial overseas experience. So it's not like these patriots, these nationalists are coming together and they don't really have a clear idea of what to do. Many of them, especially Ito Hirobumi, again, the first prime minister of Japan, spent time in England. He was on the Iwakura Mission. So he uses that knowledge to help write the Japanese constitution. Yamagata Aritomo is from Chosu between 1869 and 1870. He went to go study the militaries in Europe and the US. So he's head of the general staff. He develops the Japanese Imperial Army. So these are key people. And they have the key, crucial experience they need to develop Japan into the modern nation state that they're trying to do. These people are many things. Stupid and inexperienced are not 2 of those traits. if you're going to be reorganizing your country from the ground up, these are the kind of guys you want in government. So I mentioned in the past couple videos this notion of this thing, Fukoko Kyohei, strong country, or rich country rather, strong army, strong military. The immediate objectives of the Meiji state, and the long-term objectives of the Meiji state, are to ensure that this happens. So how do you sweep away the old institutions and build new ones? Well, what you do is you have to, and again, I talked about this in other videos, I'm reiterating it here because it's this freaking important. You have to take a population with no sense of nationalism, no sense of strong identity beyond like a basic level, which had been excluded from governance and public affairs, etc. And from that population, you have to develop a politically engaged, nationalistic, highly patriotic, politically conscious citizenry. So the emperor is going to serve as the key, the centerpiece, the focus of the whole project. The emperor is in the middle. He's here. Everything else is going to focus in some way, shape, or form towards the emperor. And this becomes encapsulated in the famous or infamous, depending on your perspective, Charter Oath of 1868. So the Charter Oath has 5 key parts to it. Number 1, deliberative councils shall be widely established in all matters decided by public discussion. So they're trying to build a politically conscious common people. 2, all classes, high and low, so they're adopting European language now, classes high and low, shall unite in vigorously carrying out the administration of affairs of state. So the business of the nation is everyone's business. We rise and we fall together. Number 3, the common people, no less in the civil service and the military officials, shall each be allowed to pursue his own calling so that there may be no discontent. Number 4, evil customs of the past shall be broken off and everything based upon just laws of nature. We have the theme of nature, naturalism. This is going to bleed over into the next series where we talk about the development of the Japanese ideology leading up into World War II and why they were so diehard in that conflict. This is where that starts. And number 5, knowledge shall be sought throughout the world. Again, use the Western tech, use Western stuff to strengthen Japan, so as to strengthen the foundations of imperial rule. So the immediate, like right away things the state's got to do is, well, they have to destroy the Han and they have to reintegrate the land into Japan. So you have to create a structure of centralized government to really do this. And the emperor is going to be put at the center of it all. So he's moved to Tokyo. This becomes the imperial capital. This becomes the center where all of the state's energies are focused. The domains, they're removed. They're gone. You can't have vassalistic relations anymore. That's not going to lead to a powerful nation state. All that's going to do is divide the country. So you have to reform the samurai, you have to re-educate them, retool them to become active members of the new Japanese state, but you have to abolish this notion of samurai. If you're going to be Western, you can't do that anymore. You have to have several tax structures in place, like a land tax, income tax, etc., and legal structures for a land market. Again, trying to become Western. You have to build a conscript-based military. And that military can't be loyal to just a prefecture. It has to be loyal to the national government. Same thing with the police. Again, you're trying to build a powerful nation state. You also have to ensure that the average person is educated enough to function in this new country, in this new state. So you have calendar reform, you have time reform, so everybody's working on the same period, on the same clock. You build up an educational system. You teach everybody to read, write, you teach them mathematics, you teach them history, politics, etc. You make the citizens active by educating them. You give them a place in the country. You need modern infrastructure, so you need canals, you need harbors, you need naval architecture, you need railroads, this is a big one. You need economic and technological development, led by the state. So this leads to what are called zaibatsu, these big corporations which are kind of started by the state, and then sometimes they're sold off to private citizens. Sometimes samurai develop these on their own. But things like Mitsui, Mitsubishi, Toyota, this is how this stuff begins. These big industrial conglomerates that are able to compete with the West. Then you have the separation of Shinto and Buddhism. So I talked about this a little bit in earlier videos. But in Japan, Shinto and Buddhism are very flexible. They're able to integrate with each other fairly well. You can't do that. You want to build a nation state. Well, Buddhism's Indian. Shinto is Japanese. You gotta pull them apart. You have to really rebuild Shinto from the ground up. This is how that state, emperor-centered Shinto, in World War II begins. This is where it gets its start. It takes about a year to really do all this. So the Japanese are working quickly, and they work very well. The problem of the daimyo and the domains, though, that gets solved by having, Satsuma and Choshu lead by example. Again, they return their lands, and then they're parceled out. And the daimyo are given salaries as governors. So you keep the old ruling elite, and you give them a place in the new system. The last key thing they really have to do is develop a national military. So in 1873, Yamagata Aritomo begins to develop the imperial militaries. So the conscription law basically mandates that you have to do 3 years of mandatory service in the military starting at age 20, and then you gotta be in the reserves for 4 years. Sometimes you have exemptions if you're a student or an adopted son, etc. Or you could opt out if you paid the government money. But the point of the conscription law is to integrate all the men into a national military and weld them even more closely into this idea of the Japanese nation state. This is called the blood tax. Now, the officers become appointed by merit, not by birth. So what that does is it basically cuts away the distinction between the samurai, this military group, and that's all they do is practice warfare, and the commoners. The two become integrated. Yes, initially many samurai do become officers, but eventually it's a by merit appointment. So you're forging a bond between everybody in the military. You're integrating them into the Japanese nation state. For many, the army becomes the introduction of, modern life. This is how they're introduced to stuff like Western food, Western-style beds, clothing, plumbing, etc. And with all these new elements of state in development, Japan fully enters the modern world. So that's it for this video, guys, and that's it for this series. Hope you enjoyed. If you are interested in learning more, I have a more in-depth series I'm going to be putting up on pre-modern Japan, and we're going to keep going with it in the series I have going on 1868 to present. So until the next video, guys, stay safe, stay healthy, and I will see you all next time.